Hi, I'm Rashonda. I'm the creator of ArtByRow.com, where I help hobby artists grow by teaching them how to focus on the process rather than the outcome. I specialize in developing creativity, creating more art in less time, and using graffiti art to generate ideas instead of always wondering what you should be working on. If this sounds like something you'd be interested in, subscribe so you get notified whenever new videos get uploaded. Now let's head on over to the art studio and do some drawings. We're going to work on today's tutorial together. Let's head on over. All right, so let's get started drawing our owl eyes. And I have just any old pencil will work. It doesn't matter, whatever feels comfortable for you. I like these mechanical pencils. That's usually what I end up using. And then what I like to do, so I'm doing mine on an artist trading card. I started doing these several years ago. I was really frustrated with feeling like I didn't have time to work on my drawings and my artwork. And I used to do these really big drawings and they just felt overwhelming, and I was working a lot of hours, and I really felt like I didn't have time. So my solution was I started doing things on the artist trading cards, and then I can get a lot more repetition in, and I can, like if I'm just practicing or I want to try some new things, working small really made a huge, huge difference. So if you're struggling with any of those things, feeling like you don't have time or you tend to just not finish your artwork, you start with it, you get bored halfway through and you don't finish, try working smaller, scale down. I like artist trading cards because they fit in a binder, so I can have a little portfolio with a bunch of different drawings. And then if I decide I want to trade them at some point, I already have a bunch of cards already done up. So I'm doing mine on an artist trading card. This is just ones that I cut out of cardstock. This is a toned, they call it like a craft paper. So I'm using that, and since we're doing owls, I thought this tan, this light brown, I thought would be perfect for that. So what we want to do is start by drawing out some guidelines. This serves a few different purposes. One, it helps us lay out where everything's going to be, where it'll be positioned overall on the paper. And then also to get the size and the placement correct. And to start getting some marks on the paper. Because if you're thinking about going from a blank paper to whatever your finished drawing is, so in this case, we're working on an owl eye. If you're trying to picture your finished drawing, it can be really overwhelming. So by doing these basic guidelines and structures for your drawing, then it kind of takes that intimidation out, because all I'm doing is drawing lines and circles, right? So no big deal, it's lines and circles. So we want the majority of this to be the owl eye. We want the owl eye to fill up a big portion of this artist trading card. So we got our guideline here, super easy. I don't want the eyeball itself right directly in the center. I want it off to the right a little bit. Here's the top of like the eyebrow. That part's not going to be visible. So there's our basic structure of the owl eye. So then the next thing is to just start putting in the details. What I like doing with any of my drawings, I like to start with the things that are easier. So drawing the pupil, that's pretty basic. So there's the pupil. We're going to add a highlight. And then we want to start adding in some detail of the fur, because basically your owl, you're going to have the eyeball itself. You're going to have a nose coming off of here somewhere. We can start adding that in. So maybe the beak is going to be right there. And then the only thing that's left for doing this type of drawing is to start laying out the feathers and the fur. So I want this chunk of fur here, I want it to come down a little bit over the eyeball. And it's a good idea to use some photos, some reference. You can go on one of the photo sites like, I think Upsplash is one of them. There's a bunch of different photo sharing websites that you can go on where people upload, photographers will upload their different photographs that they take, and you can go on there and find all sorts of different photographs of wildlife and whatever. You can just Google it, it doesn't matter. Just to give you an idea of the structure and how things should look. So I'm just darkening up the beak. So there's the beak. We have the little bit of the, like the eyebrow area there. So another thing you would want to do with your artwork is to add some little extra details will make a difference. So we don't want the eyeball just kind of floating here. So we want to draw that piece of, I guess it would be like skin that's around the outside. So we're just going to add a second line coming around the outside edge, just so we don't have the eyeball just kind of floating on the head. It'll be inset in there. And then real lightly, I want to start adding in, you know how owls have that little patch around their eye. It's usually darker or lighter than the rest. So you can make just a guideline real light. And all of this, I'm going to do this in marker. So all these lines are going to get covered up anyway. But you want to draw your guidelines lightly. And then just start going in and adding in the details. So all we're doing is adding some little bits of fur in here to break that line up. We don't want just a solid straight line. Just add some little chunks of fur, and that'll give you your texture and your details that you need. And don't stress out about what you're doing and worrying about it being perfect and all of that. So up here, and a lot of this you can do when you go back over it with your markers or whatever you want to do to color it. We'll add some texture in here, and we don't want this line to just be straight. I'm drawing a little bit darker than what I would normally do, just to make sure it shows up on camera enough. So let me see if I can get this in a good spot here so you can see it. So this line we drew pretty straight, but that's going to have some fur texture on it as well, which isn't a big deal. We'll go back over it with a marker, with a black marker, and we'll add some little fur textures in there when we do that. And that will cover up that solid line a little bit. We don't want that to be a completely solid line. The beak, that's a smoother, flat surface. So that will probably be, the beak in the eye will be your only smooth lines that you'll end up with. Everything else is just going to be a fur texture. But this is really basically the structure of the drawing. There's not too many other details that need to get added. So this eye, we're only doing one eye, but this would come here, and then it would come around off to this other side, and you would have the other eye over there. So That line will probably continue a little bit. Not quite to that point, probably closer to the center of the beak. And then we can bring that up. And if something doesn't look right, just erase it, fix it. Think about what looks off on it. I actually think I want to make this beak a little bit. So as you're working, you just kind of want to look at things and see if something doesn't look right. Just kind of ask yourself why, what looks off on it. So we want this point to be more centered in the beak, and then it's going to continue and it'll go out, and then you'd have the other eye would be over there if you were drawing the whole picture of the owl. This I think looks a little too short. So again, just look at things. If it doesn't look quite right, make some adjustments. No big deal, don't stress out about it. Especially if you're just trying to improve your art skills and your drawing skills. To do that, it's just going to take some practice and repetition. And if you're always stressed out about what you're doing and trying to get things perfect all the time, it's not going to be too enjoyable. And you're not going to want to do it, or you'll give up. You won't complete a drawing as soon as something doesn't look right. And those are the things we want to avoid and to get away from. So what we're going to end up doing with the black marker is adding in some little patches of fur. And right now I'm just penciling in a couple little indications of what I want this to look like. And you can do this however you want. There's a million different ways you can add textures and fur to your animals. So just pick one, go with it. Do several drawings. I like doing a series of 7 of the different stuff that I do. You can do 7, you can do 10, you can do 3, you can do 1, but you don't get a ton of benefit from doing just one. If you do a series of drawings, you'll start developing those skills a little bit quicker. If you're doing one of something, you're more or less just trying to get through completing a drawing of something. You know, like maybe if this is the first time you've tried drawing an owl eye, and you do the first one, for that first one, you're really just trying to get through it and complete the drawing and give it a try. Where if you do a series of them, then you'll start experimenting a little bit. You'll learn from what you're doing. Because you really should be approaching your drawings as a learning experience in the way you're going to be developing your skills. So all I'm doing is I'm using a Sharpie pen. This is a black Sharpie pen, medium point. You can do this however you want. Brush pens work really nicely. I've been saying for the past couple years I'm gonna start practicing control with my brush pens again. I used to use them quite a bit in my drawings, and then I took a break for several years when I was working too many hours and I just didn't have it in me to focus on my hobbies too much. And so I took a break for maybe about 6 years, and then got back into it again. And then once I got back into it, I realized that I miss teaching art. So I started making these videos to share my passion and my love for learning and creating artwork. So one of the things that you can do, and I like using the Sharpie pen, but you could use like a thicker marker if you wanted to. For some of these lines, I like to go in and make them a thicker line. It's a good habit to get into, to have some variation with your lines, and that's where the brush pen really comes in. But the brush pen's hard to control in that it takes a little practice to learn how to do it. Like I said, I used to use them back when there was a time where I was doing some caricature drawings. That was what I was into for a while. And when I was doing those, that's when I was really getting into using the brush pens, because you can get some really nice line variation. But it does take some practice. So what I've been doing since then, because I haven't managed to make it a priority to practice with the brush pen again, is I'll just use this outlining pen, and then I'll just go back over the lines and thicken it up so I can get a little bit of variation with my lines. You could also use like a thicker marker. Let me see if I can find one. You know, like these plain Sharpie markers or whatever type of marker you have. The thing I don't like about using those for your outlines is that they'll bleed. The ink will bleed in the paper a little bit. So what happens is this outline will be slightly fuzzy, which is fine if that doesn't bother you, or maybe you even like how it looks. All these things, it's really just a matter of personal preference. Just because I don't like something doesn't mean you shouldn't try using it, which comes back to working small and doing a series of things. If I'm doing just one drawing of something, I'm sure not going to be practicing different techniques or playing around and experimenting, because if I'm only doing one drawing, then there's a lot more pressure that it needs to be perfect and it's got to be a successful drawing. Where if you're doing a bunch of them, then if you mess something up, it's not the end of the world. You can have a little bit more fun experimenting and playing around with things. And the experimenting and trying new things really is very enjoyable. And it's a lot of fun to do it if you don't have a ton of pressure on yourself that everything has to be perfect, and you know, we have all this fear of messing something up. So what I'm doing now is I am just going in and adding a little more of the black where I want it to show like more of a shadow and add a little bit of depth. So these areas where I want it to be a little bit darker, and adding these darker areas will help create a little bit more depth in the drawing. So I'm just going back in and adding, thickening that up a little bit. This inside of the pupil is going to be solid black. And then I saved this part for last because it's the most intimidating. Trying to get that line straight. And again, you know, we got to try not to worry about it too much. It doesn't have to be perfect. in reality, in real life, if we really looked up close at an owl's eye or any animal, I'm sure this isn't completely even all the way around anyway. It probably has more curves and stuff in there, but we're not trying to do an illustration. There's a big difference. You have to know what your goals are for your drawings. I'm not trying to do an illustration of an owl eye, right? This isn't an illustration. We're not trying to do a scientific, accurate drawing of something. We're trying to do a representation of what we're drawing. So, like I said, you have to know, the first thing you have to know when you're doing your artwork is you need to know what your goals are with your art. So for me, I consider myself to be a hobby artist. And as far as my artwork itself goes, so I would say I'm a hobby artist and a teacher. I love teaching art, but I don't have any desire to be a professional artist. I do my artwork because it's enjoyable, it's relaxing, I have fun. And the way that I teach art and drawing is to focus more on those elements of what you're doing, the having fun, the enjoyment. And that comes with an approach of being relaxed and not putting as much pressure on yourself. And the thing is, if you're creating art because you enjoy it and because it's your hobby, in my mind, that's a very different approach from somebody who's trying to develop their skills to the point that they can get paid for their art and make it their career. But if you're not trying to make your artwork your career, then to me, like, why put all the pressure on yourself? It makes it less enjoyable if you're so stressed out all the time. So we want to avoid putting those pressures on ourselves and being stressed out. And it's just, for me, it's not necessary because, first of all, I'm not trying to prove anything to anyone. I'm creating artwork because I enjoy it. I find it relaxing, and I want to keep it fun and relaxed and enjoyable. So that's all I'm going to do with this marker. And then I just took a regular old eraser and cleaned up the pencil lines before I add the markers. You could use one of these, put these where you can see them, one of these pink pearl erasers work good. This was one I just had from some kind of drawing kit that I've had forever. And then clean it up a little bit. That pulled the paper. So if it pulls on the paper and pulls some of your ink off a little bit, it's not that big of a deal. Just touch it back up. So that's it for the outlining part. And then we will come back and add some color with the markers. All right, so it's time to get this thing finished up. We're going to add some color. And one of the things I just want to mention real quick is that this process that I'm showing you, this is how I typically like to draw out my artwork. This is what I found has worked for me. This has served me well the last several years. I feel more at peace with my drawing. I feel more relaxed. I'm enjoying the process, not stressing out about it so much. And so my goal with all of this is really just to encourage you to work on your artwork, to get started, to do some things. So the way that I'm showing you is just one way of doing things. This is how I work on my artwork. It's kind of a process that I go through that I repeat over and over again. And I'm showing you this not because I think this is the way everybody should do things. It's the way I do it. it's offering you a starting point, and then you can build from that. And my main goal is always just to get you doing some artwork. So specifically, you know, people that are on the fence about it, who want to make some artwork but feel like they're not good enough. Those are the people I'm really trying to reach, and to get you trying some new things, experimenting, having the courage to do it even if you don't think you're the best, because the only way to get better at anything is with practice. People aren't born being good at things. They're good because they practice and they put the time into it and the repetition. So I just wanted to point out that I'm showing you one way to do this. My hope is that if you try my process and these techniques that I'm using, and then from there you'll develop your own styles and techniques to go from. So I'm using markers. I guess that's really the reason I'm pointing it out, is that I'm using markers. You can do this with anything, colored pencils, crayons, paints, it doesn't really matter. So what I do to pick my colors is I have these little swatches of color, these little blank cardstock pieces. These are left over from when I cut out my artist trading cards. And what I do is I put my colors on here to see how they're going to look and which colors go together. So what I'm going to do is I like to use a couple of different colors everywhere. So I have this plain yellow, this bright yellow, and then I have this more of like an orange color. And that's what I'm going to use for the eyes. So the way I lay down my markers is I tend to always put the lightest color down. And when I do that, I cover the entire area that I'm working on, even though I know some of this is going to get covered up. And then what I do is I go back with this darker color. And I might put a little bit around the edge here. I'm going to put some up here for sure, because that's where there's going to be shadow. But then you can also add some lines in here to give this a little more detail. And then if you want to blend your colors, you can go back over it with the lighter color to blend it in. So to do that where you're blending your markers, you want to make sure you're working while the marker's still wet. Let's see, something underneath here because I'm going to go off the edge of the paper. So the markers I'm using, these are just some Bic markers that I got a while ago. I was using the Bic markers for quite a while. They're easy to get. I can actually get them right at the grocery store sells them, my local grocery store. So if I needed markers, I could just run up there real quick and grab them. I've since then been playing around with some other brands. And again, it's one of those things, it's just a personal preference. The only thing I don't like about the Bic markers, and why I'm kind of getting away from them more, is because you can't buy them in individual colors. At least I've not been able to find them anywhere that way. So in order to get, like if I need this blue color, I would have to buy an entire set of like 25 markers or 24 markers just to get this one color. And that's not too practical. Over the course of the years, so I started using markers probably about 10 years ago. So a lot of the markers that I have, I've had for quite some time. And they're just, it's what's left over. So as they run out, I replace them with other markers. So you'll see that I'm using all different brands. So I have some old Prismacolors, which I don't even think they make that style anymore. I think they redesigned them. And these markers, they're all alcohol-based markers. And they really last a long time. especially if you store them on their sides. They'll last a lot longer. I kind of learned that the hard way. I used to store them so they're going straight up and down. And what I found with that is if you have the dual tip markers, that the whichever end is up tends to dry out. And the usability of the marker isn't as good. So I've learned to store them correctly, and I have a marker storage bin that I can sort them by color groups, and they get stored laying down, so that's really helped. And I bought them on Amazon. They're super inexpensive. I have a couple of them. They've worked out really well. I'll throw a link in the description box. So all I'm doing is just adding in some darker areas over top of the light. The only thing you need to make sure you do is that if you want to blend where the lighter and the darker come together, just make sure you do that while the marker's still wet, which it takes a little while for the alcohol to evaporate, but once that dries, it's not going to blend. So I'm just adding in some little darker areas of some fur. And then you can also use, so I have some of these real fine tip, so I can go in and add some individual hairs if I want. And what you want to try to do is just kind of go by how it feels for you. I don't like the big solid chunks of color in one area, so I'll usually go in and add some lines in there and break it up a little bit. It's just what I like. So just kind of go with how it feels. Don't be afraid to try some different things. So that's pretty much it for that area. I don't think I'm going to add any more there. So I'm just going to keep working through this little eyebrow looking thing here. I think I'm going to do this in gray. And what the colors that I picked out are all, they're grays, browns. I'm just kind of using a combination of those colors. Like I mentioned earlier, it's always good to use a reference when you're doing something like this. If you're in fact trying to do like more realistic colors, there's absolutely nothing wrong with being more creative with your colors. If you want to do something more abstract and stylized, that's completely acceptable with your artwork. Do whatever you want to do. Experiment with new things, which is really why I absolutely love doing the artist trading cards, because there's so much freedom with what you can do as far as experimenting and trying new things, because when you're working on a smaller scale, you don't have to worry as much about messing it up. Where if I was doing this on like a full page in my sketchbook or something, which is what I used to do my artwork in, I'd always do them in a big sketchbook. And for whatever reason, I kept trying to go bigger and bigger all the time. And what I found was that I either got burnt out or bored or whatever was going on, and I would not finish it. Or I'd do something and it didn't turn out exactly like I wanted to, and then it felt like it was ruined. So then I just kind of abandoned it and never went back to working on it. And what I found is that with the artist trading cards, there's significantly less pressure for the stuff to turn out perfect, because they don't take that long to make. So this, if I wasn't explaining things and talking as I was doing it, this probably would not take me more than 30 minutes start to finish to complete it. So it's super practical to do. These fit inside a little binder, and I'll drop a link to I have a beginner's guide for artist trading cards. It's a free PDF download. I'll throw that in the description as well, and it'll explain what artist trading cards are, the benefits of doing them, how to get the most cards out of one sheet of cardstock, because what you do is you cut your own cards out of cardstock. You can buy them, but it's pretty expensive to buy them pre-cut, and all they are is cardstock cut down to a certain size, or they're a standard size to them. So I don't know, it always felt kind of silly to buy them pre-cut. I mean, you can, there's nothing wrong with buying them pre-cut, but I just bought my own paper cutter, and I just make my own. So you can get, if you cut them the right way, you can get 10 individual cards out of one sheet of cardstock. So then what I'll do is I'll just cut a bunch of them up, and I have a whole pile of blank cards, and when I feel like working on something, I can just grab a card, get started on it. There's some people I've seen that have done some really detailed and intricate designs and drawings on their cards. So there's really no limitation other than the size, but like I said, it's worked out very well for me. At least I'm getting some stuff done now instead of bailing on it halfway through because I get burnt out or bored or overwhelmed, or you know, whatever emotions are attached to all of that. So I'm just going in and adding a little bit of the darker gray just to add some depth and a little bit of shadows. And then the last thing I want to do, I'm going to leave some of this, the tan of the card showing through. The last thing I do with my drawings is I use these white Jelly Roll pens, which work really, really well going over top of the marker. Now, the only thing you want to be careful of is if the marker's still wet, this will tend to absorb into the color instead of laying on top. So it's better if you let it dry a little bit, but I don't have time to do that right now, so I'm just going to go ahead and go right on over top. So you may have to wait a little bit, or if you find that it's soaking into the paper, you might want to go back in over top of it. You can do layers of it. It's not going to hurt anything. And then the last thing I want to do is add some white areas of fur. And again, just kind of do whatever you think looks right. Use your own judgment. And the nice thing with this white is if you were to put some white somewhere and didn't like how it looked, you could always go back over it with the marker. You can cover it up if you don't like it. or like here with the black, if you go over top the black a little bit, you can just go back in, cover up those little edges. So that is pretty much it for this owl eye. I hope you enjoyed this video. Make sure you give us a like if you did. It really helps the channel grow. And also subscribe if you want to see more videos and would like to get notified when new videos are released. And that's it for this video. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you feel encouraged to make your own artwork and to try new things and not be afraid to experiment. And I will see you shortly in another video. Happy creating! So how did you do? Hopefully you followed along with the tutorial and worked on your own artwork. If you enjoyed this and you want to get notified of other lessons that are coming up in the future, go ahead and hit the subscribe button and you'll get notified whenever something new gets uploaded. Have a good day and happy creating!